Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm going to read chapter 10 of What is the Declaration of Independence today. We're almost done. We only have 2 more chapters to go. So let's see what happened after that they approved the Declaration of Independence. What happened to the signers? Chapter 10. All the men who wrote their names on the Declaration of Independence knew they were putting their lives on the line. The simple act of writing their signatures meant they might be executed. After the witty Benjamin Franklin signed his name, he is reported to have said, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." By this he meant that the signers all had to stick together, because if the redcoats caught them, they would each be hung as traitors. So it was really a dangerous act that they did by signing their names, because now the king knew who they were. Some of these men did indeed pay with their lives. 5 of the signers were captured and held prisoner by the British during the war. A dozen or more had their houses attacked and burned. Others had their businesses destroyed. The home of Francis Lewis of New York was raided by the British while he was still at the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. His wife was taken prisoner and held for several months. Later, she was freed in exchange for the release of British soldiers held by the American forces. Here's some pictures. So he'd even make it home after signing the Declaration of Independence before British soldiers raided his home and took his wife prisoner. It's possible she didn't even know why she was being taken prisoner at that time. The war was not a short one. General Washington and his troops defeated the British Army at Yorktown in October 1781. After that, the war was essentially over. So remember, they wrote the Declaration of Independence in 1776. The last battle was 1781. So that was 5 years that they were fighting the Revolutionary War. But it would take 2 more years before a peace treaty was signed. With victory for the United States of America, the real work, as outlined in the Declaration of Independence, began. Making one nation out of 13 colonies with different needs and interests was not an easy job. For that, another, even more important document had to be written, the United States Constitution, in 1787. Okay, so now we're 10 years after the Declaration of Independence was written, before they start to write the Constitution. Many of the men who signed the Declaration were eager to serve in the new government. Sam Adams became governor of Massachusetts for more than 3 years. And if you remember from the beginning of the book, Sam Adams was the one in Massachusetts who was very opposed to the British and who had a big part in the Boston Tea Party. John Hancock was also elected governor of Massachusetts many times between 1780 and 1793, the year he died. Richard Henry Lee was appointed one of the first senators from Virginia after the Constitution was passed. Benjamin Franklin, who played an important role in shaping the Constitution, was appointed the first United States Postmaster General. Others among the signers rose to even higher offices. John Adams served as vice president under the very first president, George Washington. Then, in 1796, Adams was elected the second president of the United States. He served for 4 years. He and his wife Abigail moved into the brand new White House in Washington, D.C. in 1800. So George Washington never actually lived in the White House. John Adams, our second president, was the first person to move into the White House. Thomas Jefferson became Secretary of State under President Washington. He lost the presidential election in 1796 to John Adams, but he got enough votes to become vice president. They did not agree on how the government should be run. Jefferson became the 3rd president of the United States in 1801. He served 2 terms. Ironically, both Jefferson and John Adams died on the same exact day, July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed by John Hancock. Famous or not, each of the signers are heroes who put their lives on the line and played a part in founding our country. And if you notice, they talked about that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were running against each other to be president, and Thomas Jefferson lost to John Adams as the second president. But he had enough votes to become the vice president, because back then, in the beginning of our country, you didn't pick your vice president. Whoever got the second most votes became the vice president. So a lot of times the president and vice president didn't get along. So it was not how it is today. And then there's a list of all the different people who were the signers of the Declaration of Independence. So from Connecticut, there was Roger Sherman, Samuel Huntington, William Williams, Oliver Wolcott. From Delaware, George Read, Thomas McKeon, Caesar Rodney. From Georgia, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, George Walton. From Maryland, Charles Carroll, Samuel Chase, William Paca, Thomas Stone. From Massachusetts, John Adams, Samuel Adams, Elbridge Gerry, John Hancock, and Robert Treat Paine. From New Hampshire, Josiah Bartlett, Matthew Thornton, William Whipple. From New Jersey, Abraham Clark, John Hart, Francis Hopkinson, Richard Stockton, and John Witherspoon. From New York, William Floyd, Francis Lewis, Philip Livingston, Lewis Morris. From North Carolina, Joseph Hughes, William Hopper, John Penn. From Pennsylvania, George Clymer, Benjamin Franklin, who was the oldest signer at age 70, Robert Morris, John Morton, George Ross, Benjamin Rush, James Smith, George Taylor, James Wilson. From Rhode Island, William Ellery, Stephen Hopkins. From South Carolina, Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton, Edward Rutledge, who was the youngest signer at age 26. And from Virginia, Carter Braxton, Benjamin Harris, Thomas Jefferson, Francis Lightfoot Lee, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Nelson Jr., George Wythe. So those were the men, the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence. And tomorrow we will read chapter 11, and that will be the end of our book. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're learning a lot about the Declaration of Independence. See you soon.